Hello everybody, welcome back to the Homebrew web development course thingy. Essentially this is just an intro to HTML level type stuff. We'll probably in the future get into more complicated stuff, CSS, and I hope JavaScript, because JavaScript is when the web really gets exciting. So the last time we met, we talked about section 4.6, I believe, of the, no, section 4.5 of the HTML5 specification, which happens to be the grouping content section. So we talked about the paragraph tag, the horizontal rule, the pre-formatting element, the block quotes, the ordered lists and unordered lists, and the list items and definition lists and all that type of stuff. We even looked at the figure caption, and the div element, which the div element is apparently what Dan O'Hart loves, who's present with us today inside the chat here. Essentially, today we're going to be skipping over a couple of these sections. So section 4.6 is the text level semantics. We've already looked at a little bit of this before. These would be things like creating bold text with a strong element, or the I believe the paragraph tag that's not one of those. A grouping, or italicized text, and we'll come back and look at some of these things a little bit later on, but they're not really a big part of kind of drilling down to the more granular stuff from the larger items in HTML. So there's some things that we've already looked at, like the anchor tag, and we'll look at emphasized text, which is EM. But for the most part, we're going to skip over 4.6. We're going to skip all the way over 4.7. I talked about this a bit in the pre-show. It's really an esoteric block of the language that very few people will use. It's probably used in more academic circles, and I'm not doing scientific papers or anything with HTML, so I don't have any use for it. But if you're doing maybe a course outline or something for your university, and you need to maintain history over what text was inserted and when and stuff like that, you might want to check out section 4.7. 4.8 we're going to skip over as well. It's the embedded content section, simply because a lot of that stuff is a bit more complicated than what we're currently trying to approach. There's some things in there we've already looked at. For instance, the image tag, we've looked at that. We have not looked at anything like the iframe. The iframe lets you embed one page inside of another, and you can even go so far as embedding an entirely different website. So, for instance, you could take google.com and put it inside a small window and lay that on your web page if you wanted to. So we'll look at that a little bit later on as well. Additionally, we'll also look at two other items inside section 4.8, the embedded content, and those are the video and audio tags. These are relatively new tags. They came in with HTML5. They were replacements of the object and embed tags, which you will see very frequently. In fact, if you've ever copied a video from YouTube to embed on another page, you probably saw embed and object tags. Today you have the option of using an iframe, I believe, and so you'll be able to put a YouTube video, which is just a video the size of the page, in an iframe and put that on your web page. It's just like we're talking about with Google. But we'll get into using video and audio elements in the future. Skip over the rest of that. Canvas, you can do some really great things, but not unless you know JavaScript, so we're going to skip over that. We're going to come all the way down to section 4.9 today, which is tabular data. And essentially, if you picture, and this might really just bore a lot of you to tears, but if you picture a spreadsheet, or if you think of maybe the way that records are recorded, or maybe even your finances whenever you're trying to balance your checkbook or something, or if you're just looking at purchases and the cost of the purchase and the adjusted income, or not the adjusted income, but your adjusted account balance or something, and a lot of the costs. That's kind of what we'll be looking at today with tables. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, full screen, start screen share, and just ask you guys to give me a thumbs up whenever you see the screen being shared here. Let's see. So I'll zoom in a little bit more. Here's tabular data, and again, you can see the address up here. If you want to go and find the stuff yourself, it's w3.org. /tr /HTML5-author. So, okay, so the first one we're looking at today is the tabular data section. We're going to start with the table element itself. So I've got my directory here from a couple weeks ago, the section we left off, and it was these. We were showing some CSS, I think, at the end of the class. And so I'm going to come into my code here. I'll remove this CSS, remove the style tags. We don't need those. Let me zoom this in just a bit so you guys can see everything. And then I'm going to delete everything between my opening and closing body tag. So this is what I'm left with. And again, just as a real quick run through, the first line here is the Doctype. It basically puts our browser into what's called standards mode. So our web browser has got a whole history of knowledge as far as how to process and render documents. By default, if you don't have a proper Doctype in there, the browser will fall into what's called Quirks mode. So if I bring all this stuff back and I save this, you notice we have a regular page right here. Everything looks just fine, and that is because the browser is in, please come all the way down here, you can see the browser is in standards mode. That's the page default. If we come out of that and we remove our Doctype and save this, come back and refresh, now you notice the browser is in Quirks mode. And I can zoom in again real quick. Quirks mode is essentially tells the browser to behave as though it were like a decade older, which means it's not going to properly understand all of the latest features that we have available to us in browsers today. So we always want to make sure we have that Doctype, that very first line up there, that puts the browser into its standards mode, the latest mode that it can be in, where it understands all the newest features. Next is the HTML tag, which if I remove some of this stuff, you'll be able to see it a lot better. I'll delete all the stuff that's inside the body again. So the HTML tag here starts on line 2, ends on line 8, and that identifies the start and finish, or the beginning and end of our document itself. We have the head tag here, which opens on 3 and closes on 5. That kind of encompasses the meta information about our page. Inside there, we have a title for our page using the title tag, and this is grouping content. Today, it'll be tabular data. And then down below the head is the second element inside the body tag, or inside the HTML tag, the body. This is all the visible stuff in the browser. And so inside here, we say, let's get visible. Okay. And this creates a paragraph that is visible inside our browser. There it is. So let's get visible. And you notice up here in the tab, as part of the metadata for this page, is our title. So let's see. We've got some HTML inside here. Let's go ahead and write some table markup. So we're going to jump back over to our specification here. The first element is the table element. So the table element is in the categories of flow content and palpable content, which are starting to sound familiar. We hear that a lot. So it's used in contexts where flow content is expected. So that means you can put tables inside tables if you wanted to. Let's see here. I'm sorry, correction there. The content model is what tells us what we can put inside what. So in this order, optionally a caption element. Let me zoom in a little bit here. I didn't want to do it that way. There we go. So in this order, this defines the content model. We have optional caption element, followed by 0 or more column group elements, followed optionally by a T head, which is the table head element, followed optionally by a table footer element. Levi, don't worry too much about the flow content versus palpable content. We talked about flow content a bit in the past, and you can click on that, and it'll actually tell you all the different types of elements that fall into the flow content category once it loads up this document. It's loading up a massive document, so it takes a second. Then it drops down and tells you all the different flow content items. So that's all the flow content. And palpable, I don't know if it gives you a list for palpable content, but let's just check real quick. Yeah, it does. So following elements are palpable content. So I think those modified delivery of text or something. We'll have to go into the actual semantics at a later time. So followed option by a table footer element, followed by either 0 or more table body elements. This was kind of cool. When I was reading the specification last week, that was something I learned, that you can have multiple table body elements inside of a table. I've been doing this for a little over a decade, and I didn't know that. I thought you could only have one. Or one or more table row elements, followed optionally by a table footer element, but there can only be one table footer element child in total. So let's go ahead and kind of draw some of this out to see what it looks like. We're going to start with a table tag, and we'll close the table tag. So if we come back in here, we'll jump over to our page and refresh, and you notice there's nothing there because there's nothing in our table yet. We do have the table in the document. We can come down here and we can zoom in and see that the table is indeed inside there. It's just that it's empty. There's an empty text node in there, and that's it. So we want to fix that. So if you remember from the specification, there's an optional caption element, which we will go ahead and check out. So we'll click over to the caption element. And the caption element just lets us, we put that right directly inside there. So this also has a content model of flow content, but with no descending table elements. So the caption element we will just put directly inside here. And we might say inside the caption element, we might put a paragraph and say, transactions for 2011, historical document. So if we were to come back over to our page, refresh, you notice we actually have our caption inside there now, and we can come up and click on that, and sure enough, there's a paragraph tag, a caption with a paragraph tag inside of it. Looks like everything there is good. So I personally have not really used the caption a whole lot, but if it's something you find that you want to use, then you're definitely welcome to use that. So in this particular case, I think the caption here says, looks like this might be the type of caption where you're describing what the data is inside the table. So in our case, we said these are transactions for 2011 is what our caption is. Or we might even just say, transactions or something. The next item that's going to be in there in the table is 0 or more column group elements. I don't really want to touch those right now. I just kind of want to drop into what a basic table looks like. And so the next thing we're going to put inside here is just a table body. And so I'm going to pull the caption out, and we're going to put it in a T body. Inside the table body, we're going to drop in a table row. So you'll notice that the TR is mentioned here. It can be directly inside the table, or it can be inside the table body inside the table. So we don't have to have the table body. We could just put in table row directly right here. We'll go ahead and do that right now just to keep it minimized. And then inside each table row, we have a table data, or a table department, as I typically say it, which is TD. And so we might say fishing trip would be the first table department. The second will be negative $250 or something. Actually, we won't do negative. We'll do the way banks actually do it and put in parentheses, which took me by surprise as a young boy of 21 years old, I think. And then we'll maybe put in here our ending balance of $1,000. So we've got our bank account, and we're just kind of looking at the different types of things that we're paying as we go through. So there's a fishing trip, $250 it cost us. We have $1,000 remaining. The table does have an attribute on it. We can say border equals 1. And you notice what that does is puts fancy border around the table. So this helps us distinguish kind of where values are beginning and ending. So we might come in here and put in another row of data. And we put in a table data item, or TD, table department. And we'd say tackle box. And the tackle box is going to cost us $100. It's a really fancy tackle box. And this takes us down to $900. And so you can kind of see how we start to build out what might look like a spreadsheet or a list of expenses just by entering sequential table rows with table data fields inside them. So again, so we have 2 different table rows right here. Let's go ahead and drop in a third one. And inside here, we'll say we're also going to get some flip-flops. And the flip-flops will cost us $20. Which brings us down to $880. So we come back over here, refresh the page. Sure enough, we have a third table row inside there: fishing trip, tackle box, and flip-flops. And this is kind of an instance where the table body thing comes in handy. So you notice we talked about you can have multiple table bodies inside of a table. This was something that took me by surprise. So for instance, there's a thing called zebra striping of table rows. So we might want the first table row to have a kind of light gray background, the second table row to have a white background, and the third table row to have a light gray background. And you can accomplish this with CSS. We can do some really fancy selectors, but you can also do this just by having multiple table bodies. So we could say tbody, and we'll give this a class of dark. And we'll close the tbody, and we'll give this a tbody. We won't give that any class, or we could give this a class of light if we wanted to. And we'll close that tbody, and we'll open up a last tbody. I feel like I'm referring to a wrapper or something. You know, tbody. And we'll give this one a class of dark. And close that. So I'm going to increase my tabs here so I can visibly see what is nested inside what. And so we have 3 T-bodies, one that's dark, one that's light, one that's dark. We can actually come up to the title area. We'll add in some style again. And we'll just say anything that is dark, so period dark, that targets everything that has a class value of dark. We'll just put inside here a background color of CCC. And so if we refresh, you'll notice now I actually have a dark row followed by a light row followed by a dark row. And that's, we could take the border off of the table at this point. It's no longer needed to help us identify which row is which now. So we can use multiple table bodies to target individual pieces of data like this. We could even come in here and put in a second row of data inside that table body. And we could say fishing weights or something. And, you know, would you say this didn't cost us anything? Uncle Larry gave these to us. And so this still left us off at $1,000. So now we've got 2 different table rows inside this top table body. we'll say those are somehow logically joined together. They have meaning. And so you notice now we've got a table body here, which encompasses 2 table rows, a table body here, which is 1 table row, table body on the bottom, which is a single table row. So you can use the table body element multiple times inside the table to create logical groupings of table rows if you like. I have always in the past just had 1 table body. It was just a habit. And like I said, I learned last week reading the specification that I can have as many as I like in there. So that is definitely going to change the way I write tables, when I write tables, if I write tables. So you'll find that tables are not used a whole lot in much of what you'll do today, unless you're in a very specific niche audience where you're doing some stuff for banks or something like that. So we just saw the caption element. And again, the caption element can precede these table bodies. So we can come back in here and say caption, and we'll put in a paragraph here, fishing trip with Uncle Larry. I don't actually have an Uncle Larry, but I'm sure if I did, we'd go fishing. And so now we have this caption up at the very top of my table. It tells me this is my fishing trip with Uncle Larry, how much it cost me to go fishing. The next item we'll check out here, so we check the caption. That's followed optionally, or followed by 0 or more column group elements. Again, I don't want to look at those just yet, but what I do want to check out is the table head element. So what we're going to do is come inside here. Now that follows the caption, so we're going to do a T head. Inside the table head element, we're going to click on that and jump to this portion of the specification. So the table head represents the block of rows that consist of the column labels, or the headers, for the parent table element, if the table head element has a parent and it is a table. So the table head has inside of it, let's actually just look at the content model here, 0 or more table row elements. So it kind of looks just like a table body, but inside the table head, we put in a single table row, and then inside that table row, I believe we use TH tags. So you can see right here, this example shows a table head element being used. Notice the use of both TH and TD elements in the table head. The first row is the headers. The second row is an explanation of how to fill in the table. So the first row, the table headers, we're going to come in here and we're going to say TH, and we'll just say the product or the expense. The next table header is going to be the cost, and the last one will be the balance. So we're going to save these, refresh our page, and oops, we have something wrong here. That's a TD instead of a TH. Notice it didn't apply the implicit bold that it did to the previous two here. So now our table has caption, it has nice bold table headers, and this is some of the implicit styling that is provided by the browser, and it's largely consistent across browsers. So if we were to come over here and we were to open up the same page in Google Chrome, for instance, let's go open with Chrome, you'll notice it looks essentially the same as the Internet Explorer version. So not really any differences there. It's kind of the great thing. Browsers generally render stuff exactly the same, and the good thing is that things don't need to look exactly the same in every browser anyway. You're not really going to have a whole lot of people that view your website from a different browser every day. And even if you do, they probably won't care as long as it is workable. So that is the table header. Now we could come in here and we could increase the, there's one thing I really hate, is whenever the borders of the cells are right up against the text of the cell. So the cell is the TD. And so there are a couple different attributes on the table element that maybe we'll take a second, we'll just look at. So there's, let's see, that's the table element. So the table element, maybe it doesn't have these anymore. And there's some things I learned just by going through the specification. In this version of HTML, a particular attribute was dropped. But there used to be on table elements a cell padding and cell spacing. They might have removed it. I think they did, because you're typically not supposed to use attributes on elements to acquire some type of visual effect. So instead, what we would do is we'd come down here and we would say our TDs and our THs should have a padding of 0.5 em. So again, this is our selector. We're selecting all TD elements and all TH elements, and we're giving them a padding of 0.5 ems. So an em, 1 em, is essentially the size of a letter in my text. So we're going to be giving it about a 50% padding around the borders of the table departments. So you see I actually get a nice padding. There's a space here between this opening parenthesis and the left side of the cell that is contained inside. Now you notice there is there's a cell spacing. There's this gap between cells, and we can actually turn that off by going to the table and typing in cell spacing equals 0. That removes that cell spacing. So I have to check specification. That might be an old way of doing that. It definitely is an old way of doing it. I don't know if it's still the way to do it or not, but it's something we'll check out. So there's another thing here. You'll notice I might want these to be aligned right, and I can actually have to accomplish that with CSS. So I might want, every third TD to be aligned right. So you notice in this TR, here's the third TD. I want my dollar signs and stuff to be to the right. This one's also the third, and this one's also the third. So there's a selector that we could use. I'll go ahead and show it to you now. And it'll be the nth child or the nth of type. And so what we're going to do is check out the TD, that is the nth child 3. And we're going to say text align right. Now what this does, so you notice it moves all those over to the right. What this does is it targets every TD inside the document. So that's, you'll notice it's actually kind of highlighting these. It's every TD element here. And then we further qualify that selector by asking for the nth child. So we only want TDs that are in a certain place inside their parent. So remember, whenever we refer to these as children, we are referring to them in the context of their parent, which is a TR. So this is the nth child 1, which is also the first child. So we could come up here and type in first child like that, and that is the same thing as typing in TD nth child 1. You can kind of see how those are both pretty much the same thing. There is no second child. You can't do second child like that. At this point you have to start using the nth child selector. So you could say nth child 2, nth child 3 in this case. The nth child 3 also just happens to be the last child inside these TRs. And you guys, if this is the least bit confusing, please speak up inside chat real quick and let me know. But I think this part should be mostly straightforward. It's a little bit different because we haven't done a whole lot of CSS, but this is a kind of a common selector you'll use. So because we're targeting the third TD and it's also the last child, we can just come up here and type in last child. So this targets all TD elements that are also the last child, which means they're the last element inside their parent. And so if we come back and refresh, we get the same exact effect. So you see in this case, now we can actually see that the dollar signs aren't lined up in each row, so we can actually see it's not 9,000, it's 900, and it's not 8,800 or anything like that, it's 880. So what we would do is we could come in here and we could add, you'll notice in the example that they showed us, in the table head, they showed us a second table row, but the second table row didn't have table head tags in it. It had table data. And those were descriptions of how you fill things out. So we'll say like name of item. And the next one will be the cost of item. And the next one will be New Balance. So we'll come back in and refresh that. You notice those are rather large. We could come in and actually target those and drop the font size a little bit. So that is the second table row inside the table head. So using kind of what we learned, that also happens to be the last child. This table row happens to be the last child in the table head. So we could come in here and we could say in the T head, we want the TR that is a last child. And we'll set the font size of that to 0.5 ems. So we're going to make that half as large as the rest of it. So you notice our text is greatly reduced inside that second TR of the table head. Yeah, I can slow down. Let me just kind of recap what we've looked at, so it might be helpful if we go back over it real quick. So we start out with a table here. Now in this particular table we have set the cell spacing attribute to be 0, and you remember what that does. If we take that out, it creates this gap between the TD elements. So each of the TD elements has a gap between the other TD elements, and that's really visible if we set the border equal to 1. So now you can really see that gap between elements. That's the cell spacing. So we can just turn the cell spacing off. And again, that attribute might be supported for historic reasons. That may not be the way you do it today. I'll have to go back and double check. But that should work for a long time into the future as well. But may not in fact be the most modern way of doing it. The next thing that we're going to look at here real quick was the optional caption. So your table does not have to have a caption on it, but if you want to give a short description of about what the data is inside it, that's a good place to put it. So in our caption we've said this is a fishing trip with Uncle Larry. You notice the browser automatically makes that caption centered and gives it a nice spacing around it. That is not something we had to provide. This is something the browser provides. And it's fairly consistent between browsers too. So we just looked inside Google Chrome as well, and it looked very reminiscent of what we see here in IE. The next thing we looked at, so that was our optional caption. And again, we could just take the caption out if we want to, save that, refresh the page. It's optional. I happen to think it looks pretty pretty inside there, so I'll leave it. I'm going to fix some casing here because it annoys me. Fishing trip with Uncle Larry. So the next thing we saw is the table head. So just like the head document kind of describes things about our document itself, it kind of gives that meta information, so too does the T-head tag describe our table. It describes our data inside the table. And so the first table row, which is this TR, the first table row inside our T head is the labels that tells us which one of the rows represents what. So in this case, that is these three things right here. These are our TRs, or I'm sorry, these are our THs inside the first TR inside our T head. So let me go ahead and open up our little DOM Explorer thing down here. And I'll come up and I'll select one of these. And so you'll notice, I'll zoom in a bit, we wind up with a T head right here. You notice that T head is followed by 3 T bodies, 1, 2, and 3, and those have alternate values. So the first one is dark, the second one's light, the third one is dark. That T head, whenever we expand it, it has 2 table rows inside of it. The first table row, if we come up here, you notice it highlights the expense, cost, and balance. The second table row is more the description of what these things are. So this is the name of the item, the cost of the item, and the new balance. Inside that first table row, if we expand that, you'll notice we have 3 table headings. So that's TH, TH, and TH. That represents the actual headings. So the first vertical column is the expense column. The second vertical column is the cost. And the third vertical column is the balance. So what we're doing there is we're saying essentially there is a relationship between this TH balance and everything below it. There's a relationship between cost, the second TH, and everything below it. So the second TH has an implicit relationship with the second TD in every subsequent table row. So the first TD is tied to the first TD of every other row and also to the first TH inside the table head. The second TH, the table head, is tied to the second TD of every table row inside the table. So you notice every one of these second ones represents a withdrawal or a deduction to our account balance. And the third one, which is the table balance, so this is the balance itself, it's our new balance or our remaining balance. That is implicitly tied to the TD, the last TD of every table row. So the last one, $1,000 is the remaining balance, $900 is the remaining balance, and $880 is the remaining balance. So there's that implicit relationship between these things. The next thing we looked at, again, just going back over this real quickly, are multiple T body tags. So those are optional again, so we can take those out if we want to. And now you notice we only have one T body tag. It follows the table header. We can close that. One T body tag. And the T body tag has all of our table rows inside it. So we lose that styling, we lose the background color because we now no longer have multiple T bodies. And we no longer have anything with the class of dark. We deleted that, so we can get rid of this styling rule up here. One other thing I think I'll do real quick is you notice this name of item is left aligned, cost of item is left aligned, and new balance is left aligned. I think I'll change that as well. So we're setting the font size to 0.5 ems. I think I'll also set the text align to center. So that targets the T head element, which is this element right here. And then it looks inside the T head element for all of the TR elements. So it's T head space TR. That means find all of the TR inside of a T head. And so what it finds is both of these TRs. And then it applies kind of a filter to that result, and it says I only want the TR that is a last child, which means it's the last thing inside of its parent. So in this particular case, this T head has 2 children. It has this TR and it has this TR. But that last filter, what's called a pseudo class, this pseudo class right here, reduces our selection from both of these TRs to only the one that is a last child, which means this TR, because it is the last child of its parent, which happens to be this T head up here. And so we've applied a reduced font size to that and a text align equals center. So whenever we save that and refresh, now our text items are all centered on here. Looks like New Balance is not, though. I have to figure out why that might be. Maybe it's too long. If I just say balance, that's interesting. So I'm going to bring my borders back. I love this because sometimes you guys get to see me doing a bit debugging. Because that text align center should be affecting the TR that is the last child. Oh, maybe I know what the deal is. So this is centered, this is centered, this is not centered. Our TR opens. TD, 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 those are all closed. Let's open it up over here inside Chrome just to see if we get a different rendering inside Chrome. We don't. For some reason, both of these are not centering that last table department or table data. That is so interesting. Now cost of item is not centered. So interesting. What if we change this and we set the text align on the actual TD elements? Okay, so that works. Okay, I was losing my mind here, but let me explain what's going on here. So this should fix it. Yeah, okay, so now New Balance is centered. I love this. We get to see some actual debugging here. So before, what we were selecting was the TR that is the last child inside of a T head. So you can think of these parts right here. This is called the selector. It's kind of parsed right to left. So basically, we're finding all TRs that are inside a table row that is the last child of a table head. So we're finding all TDs, I'm sorry, which is all of these, which are inside a table row, which is the last child of a table head. So they're inside this table row, and that is the last child of this table head. So we target the actual TD as opposed to targeting the TR. So in this case, we are applying these rules to the TR element. This is kind of becoming a CSS thing here. When we do that, interestingly enough, the first two table departments or table data tags, they do get centered, but the last one doesn't. I really am baffled by that, but it happens in both Chrome and IE, so that's super interesting. So all we're doing is, rather than applying the styles on this level and hoping they cascade down onto all the table departments or the table data, we're going to just modify the selector a bit and say we want to actually apply them to the TD elements inside the last child TR, which is inside of a T head. And when we actually go that granular with it, we see we actually get the rendering that we want. That is so bizarre. I'm tweeting about that as soon as we're done. As soon as we're done here. You'll notice there's also another change here. There's another implicit styling difference between IE and Chrome that I just noticed as well. You'll notice the caption for IE is above the table. It's outside of the table cells and everything. There's no border around it, which I actually think looks really good. Chrome, they don't have much of a spacing between it. So if we go back and we look at IE, there's this nice spacing around the caption. In Chrome, the spacing is only around the sides and a little bit on the top, not too much, but nothing kind of below it. You could go back and add that in there if you like by increasing the padding on the caption, but there's going to be small little differences like that between various browsers. But again, don't worry about that kind of stuff unless you absolutely need to have everything perfectly identical in every other browser, which is almost never the case. So we've looked at table rows and table cells. There's another really cool thing that we essentially can look at. The call group is another item that is mentioned here. And so that can follow the caption element. You can have 0 or more call group elements followed optionally by a t-head element. So we're going to put the call group in front of the t-head, and we should actually see an example. We'd see an example of call groups down here, but if we click over to those, essentially you can get an idea of what it means just by the name of it. So call group is a grouping of columns. So the call group element represents a group of one or more columns in the table that is its parent. If it has a parent, and that is a table element. So it's a bit confused in the way I just read that. Let me read that again. The call group element represents a group of one or more columns in the table that is its parent, if it has a parent, and that parent is a table element. So if the call group element contains no call elements, then the element may have a span content attribute specified, whose value must be a valid non-negative integer greater than 0. So essentially we would say, after the caption, we could put in a call group, and we will put in here 3 columns. One will be the expense. I believe I'm writing this right. We'll put in the cost, and we'll put in the balance. So this call group has 3 different columns inside it. If we refresh over here, we see the expense, cost, and balance are all up here on top, tied together essentially. This is another one of the things that I've almost never ever used. Essentially, you know, I've used the table head, and that's about it. But let's actually, I guess, you know, for the sake of posterity, we'll go ahead and look at, you know, what this is. So if there are no call elements, then the element may have a span content attribute specified, whose value must be a valid non-negative integer greater than 0. What that means is if there's no columns inside here, if we just say, you know, hello world, we need to tell the call group how many columns it should span. So we could say span equals 3. We have 3 columns down here. Table row has 3 table H's inside it, or TH's, or table headers. So we're going to say the call group spans all 3 of those. And this call group is actually should be about the size of all those if I understand how this thing works properly. So the body table caption call group span equals 3. Actually not working the way I'm expecting it to. That's interesting. Again, this is not one of those commonly used elements in my experience. It's interesting that I can't select it. The hello world is putting it right up inside the body. Let me see here. Let me just double check if I'm using this right. I'm getting the feeling that I'm not. So if the column group element contains no call elements, then the element may have a span content attribute specified whose value must be a valid non-negative integer greater than 0. The call group element and its span attribute take part in the table model. The span IDL attribute must reflect the content attribute of the same name. The value must be limited to only non-negative values greater than 0. So this is actually kind of confusing, this call group element, just a bit. Context in which this element can be used as the child of the table element after any caption elements. We have that after the caption element. Yes, we do. It's just a valid or a lesson in studying the spec. And before any t-head, t-body, t-foot, or tr elements, okay, we have followed that rule. Content model, if the span attribute is present, then it ought to be empty. Okay, so if this I did that wrong then. So this is supposed to be empty, the column group is. So, oh, you know what, I think I understand this. Column group span equals 2. This is such an obscure tag. Let's see here. I'm probably going to have to go back to the specification here because this is just a very weird one. I think I've got to change some other parts in the table for you to actually see what this does. I honestly have never used this, but I hate to skip it without covering it. If the span attribute is present in 0 or more call elements, I'm probably just going to skip this because it's not really clicking for me and I have to go play around with it just a bit. But essentially, you can cause columns to span over into other columns. So let me show you. There's another way to do that. If we were to, essentially, we have the balance and the cost. So suppose I took out in the table header, we just have two items here. We have the expense and the cost. I'm going to come down and remove the third one from the TR. And since we're removing the third one, we can remove this. I'll change this last child to center. And then I'm going to create a column span. So call span equals 2 on that, and call span equals 2 on this. And you notice what we've done here is the cost now spans 2 columns, and the cost of item also spans 2 columns. So where we had, one row with 3 vertical rows, we now have 3 vertical rows on the bottom here, but on the top we only have 2 vertical rows because the second one, that second TH and the second TD, they both have call span equals 2. And so the call group does something similar to this, clearly a bit more esoteric and unfamiliar to me than the actual call span attribute. But I'll actually look that up and get the appropriate markup for something like that. So this is a way you might want to lay out some tables where you want to just say, listen, we're going to be talking about cost, or we're going to be talking about actual money. Say cost and balance in this particular case here. And so the result is going to be something that more accurately matches what we're looking at. So this is, let's see, I get the feeling that we're probably coming up on an hour now, probably about 50 minutes into it. So Levi, does that kind of cover, did I slow back down or go back far enough for it to kind of make sense again for you? Some of this unexpectedly is a little confusing. For instance, the call group, which it's just eating me up. I'm going to have to go back and check this thing out to see exactly why I would want to use this silly thing. But I think that should be relatively straightforward. So the call group takes the call elements. Yeah, I do type a little quick. But yeah, like you did, anytime, just tell me, hey, slow down, go back, redo that, and I'll be more than happy to. So we've gone through it. We kind of did the overall catch up on the document itself, talking about the doc type, the root element, which is the HTML tag. We talked about its meta information, how that goes inside the head tag. We did a few things with CSS again, so we looked at a couple different selectors. We looked at the last class we looked at the last child pseudo class. We looked at the last child pseudo class here as well. We also did the nth child or nth of type. And we looked at those as well. So I'm going to just look at the call tag here. So the call element, this is what goes inside the call group element. So if it has a span attribute that is absent, then 0 or more call elements go inside that. And so the call element has no categories. It is only used as a child of a call group element that doesn't have a span attribute. As an empty content model, the content attributes are the global attributes and the span. The DOM interface, we don't worry about that at this particular moment. So if a call element has a parent, and that is a call group element that itself has a parent that is a table element, then the call element represents one or more columns in the column group represented by that call group. Blah. The element may have a span content attribute specified, whose value must be a valid non-negative integer, greater than 0. The call element and its span attribute take part in the table model. This is a very confusing wording, but I'll tell you what I'll do. For next week, I'm going to go back and actually make use of this call group. It'll be the first time in my life ever, I believe. And I'll have an example for you guys next week of how to use that. And maybe a real-world practical application of it, because nothing comes to mind, to be completely honest. But essentially, these are tables, and tables have gone inside tables in the past. I need to make sure that they can still go inside tables today. I believe they still can. I believe that's semantically appropriate. So we're going to go back up and check out the table. So the table has TD elements. You need to come down and find the actual TD element. We'll go and look at the TR. TR has TD. And the content model is flow content. So the table is flow content as well, which means we can still legally put tables inside TD elements. So we could come down inside here, and we might want to, instead of saying 880, this is going to be super ugly, but just to prove a point, we'll put in another table here. Inside the table, we'll put in a table row. Inside that table row, we'll put in a TD, and maybe we'll say like 400, and we'll put in another table row that also has a value of 400. So for whatever reason, we're splitting that up in two. So now we have a table inside this table department, inside this table row. So we could go back in and turn on the border equals 1 on that. And you can now see we have a table inside the TD, which is itself inside a TR, which is itself inside a T-body, which is itself inside of a table. So we can nest tables as well. That, I think, is pretty much sufficiently covering the grounds of tables as you will use them in your web pages and stuff. Again, those are super helpful if you're maybe laying out the hours of operation for your business. Monday, you open at this time, close at this time. Tuesday, you open at this time, close at this time. It's also helpful if you're, like I said, you're tracking expenses, maybe what you purchased, how much it costs, what your new balance is, or just any other type of application where something like an Excel spreadsheet would be appropriate. So those are tables. More than happy to take 10 minutes real quick and answer any questions at all about HTML, CSS, or JavaScript in general. This is kind of the wild end of the show, where if you have anything that's been picking your mind or something you saw on the web that you want to have a real quick set of eyes over your shoulder to help you understand something, I'm super stoked and ready to discuss it. So I'll give that just a second while I kind of wrap things up, and if you have a question, just go ahead and put it inside the chat room over at learn.samson.ms. How do you remember all these tags? You will find that you really only use a subset of all of these HTML tags. You'll find yourself kind of working into a mode where you maybe use 20 of them or something, and they're going to become so ubiquitous and so familiar to you. And the fact that they are largely abbreviated English words is super helpful. So sometimes there's exceptions, like if you want a table, you write out the word table. You don't do like TBL or anything. If you want a table row, it's a TR. If you want to add a body to the table, it's a T-body. If you want to add head to the table, it's a T-head. If you want to add a header to the table instead of table row, it's just TH. So you'll learn kind of what to expect, and if you drop in something and you don't get the formatting that you're expecting, like you remember, let me go ahead and share the screen again real quick, but whenever we dropped in our table row, it's very intuitive, especially if you're a native English speaker. because then you can just start guessing at things. Like if I want to add a caption to my table, I just write a caption tag. Caption doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to a Russian speaker. It might actually, they might actually pronounce it the exact same way. But people who don't speak English natively, there's kind of a gamble with some of these words that they're not going to make any sense. And so but we notice here this this second th, which is bold and centered and everything. If I were to change that to a td, you notice I have the wrong tag in here now. I don't get the formatting that I'm expecting. I'm expecting this to be bold, just like expenses. And so I know, okay, I typed something wrong. And I come in here and I realize, okay, that should have been th. That was essentially what happened during our live coding today. And so you'll find yourself doing that as well. Not to mention, sometimes you'll get a good editor. Like I'm using Sublime Text. And anytime I do a less than and a T, you'll notice it gives me a whole lot of suggestions here. Do I want to do a table tag, table body, TD, text area, T foot, TH, T head, title? Essentially, it tells me all the tags. And so I could say, actually, right here, I want to come back out. After my table head, I do want to do a T, what was it, foot? Oh, there it is. I just hit tab, drops it in there. Inside the T foot, I might put in a table row. And inside table row, I'll put in a couple TDs, and I'll say, these were the things, and this was the money. So now we have this T foot, which is down here at the very bottom. These were things, this was the money. And we could add that call span to inside the T foot to make that span across two table columns. And so in editor itself, if it's good enough, it has the language library kind of built into it. Will help you remember a lot of those tags. Notebook++, I think you probably mean Notepad++. Notepad++ is another good editor. The reason why I like Sublime is because Sublime has a really extensible kind of architecture, so people can write plugins. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and possibly thousands of plugins written for Sublime. And so it's if you want to try your hand, you can come in here and you can, the preferences for the settings, the default, you notice I can actually come in and edit this JSON. So I could come down, I could actually go to the settings for the user. You notice my font size is currently 18. I can change that to 32. And as soon as I save it, you notice it just modified the entire application for me. So I can change that again to 18. You get extremely granular control over the entire application. That's one of the things I really like about Sublime Text. But Notepad++ is really great too. I've used that in the past, and it's definitely a good, solid alternative as well. So with that, I think we're probably done. I'll go ahead and call it quits and do some post-production editing of this, but I do appreciate you guys hanging out with me today, and I'm so terribly sorry about the craziness this week and not being able to do the live class yesterday, and then of course missing it by 2 hours today. But hopefully next week, next week we'll have that all taken care of. One last question, Levi asked: do you design websites from scratch or do you use templates? Both. Just depends on what the site is. Sometimes you'll design from scratch and you'll save that design at a particular moment in time when it's not completely done, and that will become a template for you as well. So you might build out the overall bones of a page, and then you'll save that as a template, and then you'll use that template to build out the other pages. So it's definitely a both and, not an either or. And a Patriot's Dream, thank you so much. Yes, my cold is much better this week. Actually, I don't have it. I just broke my neck this week or something. So I traded one nasty thing for another. So thank you guys so much. I'll see you guys later on. Thanks for hanging out. Bye.